because people don't know. This isn't common knowledge. Should it be common knowledge? Likely, yes, but it is not common knowledge all the time what people need. I really do need some help coming up with what are the recommendations for what is good, better, and best for open meetings when it comes to accessibility. And we've been talking a lot about accessibility from a hearing and visual perspective, but there's, we're about to switch at some point to the other ways that people have not been able to access open meetings. There's lots of other reasons too. But I just want to say I'm going to need some help writing this report and helping establish those baseline requirements. And we're lucky that you all are here.
Laura, can I just add, because the whole can't read minds thing, I just want to be clear that when I said that, what I meant was, and again, I'm coming from this environmental perspective. When you go in and an engineer goes in and builds a road, and environmentalists pop up and say, this is terrible for fill in the blank. Which endangered species are we, the engineers don't necessarily speak that language of the endangered species, of the beavers or of the wetlands. And they need that help. And I guess that's what I mean. It's like an engineer can't necessarily read the minds of the ecology. And I think, yes, we have had people with disabilities for all of humanity. And what is this moment call for in terms of accommodations? What would be an accommodation 10 years ago would be laughable now, because we have so much better accommodations. How can we describe what the best accommodations are at this time? That's what I meant by reading minds.
AJ.
Yeah, thank you. First of all,
can we pause for 1 second, please?
There's the recording.
The recording stopped for an unknown reason, so just give me a moment, please.
Sure.
It looks like it's still on the screen.
Yeah, and in my meeting, it seems to still be recording and transcribing.
Maybe it's a separate. It says you started recording to the cloud, recording it stops, so maybe recording it stopped refers to that thing that started at 10:56 and not the total recording.
I don't know. I didn't hit any buttons.
Yeah, so. No, I know. I think we are recording. Okay. Sorry, AJ, to interrupt. We just had a technical issue that we need to comply with.
I've had it myself in conducting meetings. I appreciate the caveats about unfounded mandates and about mandates to towns, but I'm not thoroughly convinced that towns, the state, other entities really have understood the ADA and state disability law as mandates. That they haven't, it's in there, but we don't mean it really, because I think things would look very differently. We keep using the inconvenience, the technical requirements, the cost to defer basic civil rights to people with disabilities in ways we would not tolerate for any other protected minority. So I'm not really convinced that everybody understands that these accommodations are mandates. Yes, there are competing priorities. There were always competing priorities. I was a disability advocate in the legislature, and people would, legislators would say, but there are so many other competing priorities. Yep, and they had their advocates speaking as forcefully as they could. So I think we have to go forth with the same amount of clarity and assertiveness. If Vermont law, and I'm thinking in particular of the floor vote, the no electronic voting, and for town meeting, if Vermont law is in conflict with federal and state civil rights protections, then that needs to change. And I realize it's not simple, but that's the bottom line. There is no other population that has continually been told wait, or sort of somehow or other been co-opted into their own marginalization. And I think we need to be really clear about where rights are being delayed and therefore denied. Thank you.
Laura Cushman.
Am I unmuted? Okay, so I guess just a reflection of what everybody's saying. I think that I think I heard Frank say early on, we need to pick platform, whatever the hybrid or remote platforms, just make a. So I'm just thinking best practices, sort of address this first agenda issue. Yes, pick a platform or two that, we are advising that the towns use. And then, because those platforms already, part of my frustration is that yes, obviously there are going to be concerns. If the microphones don't exist, if the hearing devices don't exist, if the computers don't exist, there will be cost, but also so many of the accessibility, all of the platforms have accessibility features built in. All we have to do is figure out which platforms are the best platforms that have the most accessibility features and choose those platforms and advise the towns to use those platforms. And then, like Laura was saying, create a guide for our community members to be able to use the accessibility features that they need to use. So if they need live captions, if they need CART, if they need a screen reader capability, if they need keyboard navigation, then they have a guide that helps them to know how to use those features. And then so many of, it certainly hasn't addressed every accessibility issue in a remote hearing, but so many of those accessibility features will assist people who need them, and they're already built in and they don't come with an extra cost. So I'm concerned about this sort of overblown concern about cost. Yes, there will be cost, but it's not like every single accessibility feature that we're going to try to help people have is going to cost the town more money. It's like, oh, now we need to add this. That's going to tick up the price. And then we need to add. It's not. They're built in. There's so many built in. If we can just choose and provide a guide for people to be able to know how to use them.
And Laura, I think that would be, I really like that point. And I think what would be helpful and what I want to have a conversation with you and Laura Siegel about is what are those factors that a town should look for in a platform? Or, do we recommend 2 different platforms that have all those features? Because I think you're 100% right that choosing the platform can get people really far, the correct platform can get people really far down the line. And I think there's a tension that is becoming really clear to me, which is we were asked to create best practices, and that we probably still should, but a lot of what we were talking about is not best practices, they're required practices. And so we need to ourselves reframe that best practices to required practices versus best practices, because those are 2 separate things. Required practices is what we need to all be doing to follow the law, and to accommodate everybody, and we should be doing that as a matter of course. Best practices are things that we should ask participants to do, like maybe this is a required practice and I'm going to misspeak, but I think of a best practice as something that Laura suggested, which is that somebody describe themselves and say their name. That is something that a municipality can't always enforce, but it is best practice and should become part of the norms of the meeting, that is what we do. But transcription is a required practice, not a best practice. So there's a difference between the two. And I don't know how we're going to do that in this report, but I think that's an important piece, that there's a difference between what's required, and I want to be careful that we don't inadvertently put things that are required into best practices and continue the rhetoric of, yeah, that's ideal, but we can't do that. I just want to be careful of that myself. Kate.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's worth mentioning that if towns are, for whatever reason, unable to afford accessible town meetings, then they already have the built-in option at their discretion of the less expensive Australian ballot option, right? So like they can choose. If they don't want to fund it, then they can choose the less expensive option. It is already there for them. It is already within their purview and control.
A good point, Kate. Well, I mean, it hurts. It has a cost, and that needs to be debated too. But
exactly. It is not. Oh, it's cheaper. It's more accessible, therefore better. It's cheaper. It's more accessible, and there are trade-offs.
Yes,
I think that a town needs to, and all of us as we create our democracy together, we need to have both the quantitative, the accessibility, which is incredibly crucial, and we also have to have great quality processes that people want to be involved in. Otherwise, people don't care about democracy, which we have seen across America, people not feeling like democracy is for them. So I think we need to have both.
Yes. Frank, and then Laura.
Since in the report, once again, is maybe because I've learned so much just being in the room, as everybody has, with everybody here, that we offer up a list of witnesses that the committee could call to personalize these issues, which may elevate them beyond a written word, which you've probably read about before. And so I think that Kate, Laura, and Kate's and everybody that's been here in the past, as well as with Susan, with it.
We absolutely will put a list of everybody who's attended our meetings, right?
And have them say, listen, if you want, have them as witnesses, because Susan would be, how you put that in writing where she's able to communicate. I think it's really an in-person thing. This whole inclusion thing is really in person. When we're in the legislature has to feel all that, I believe, and then have the report be as a guide to what kind of things they want to get out of witnesses. Just a suggestion.
Laura.
Okay. I just want, I did want to say, like, I know you just mentioned, like, talking about the different platforms, and it is in the document that I submitted where I have a chart that compares the accessibility features of Zoom, Google Meet, and Microsoft Teams. And so awesome, you can see, what accessibility features they all have. Some folks have preference for Teams, some people have preference for Zoom, but anyway, so that is laid out. And and I realize that, that's sort of addressing the remote or virtual or remote or hybrid aspects of participation and accessibility. And that's not necessarily addressing the polling issue or some other issues about it. But it is there. And, and as a person who is able to participate in meetings without the need for accessibility features, I don't know the benefits of Zoom over Microsoft. I can only read the differences in the features. I don't have the lived experience of having to rely on those features. So maybe getting a little bit of feedback from people who have used those features to know what works best might be another step further in making a decision or making a recommendation, I should say, about which platforms might be incorporated in hybrid meetings. But that information is there in that document if anybody wants to have a look.
That's really helpful, and I apologize that I haven't read that document, Laura. But I will, and probably have some follow-up questions for you. Okay, we're getting beyond time, so I want to put a bookmark here and move to resources and incentives for public participation, which we have been talking quite a bit about hearing devices, but other topics are childcare, transportation, translators, food, and we've been talking quite a bit about hybrid meetings. So if we could talk about childcare, translation, transportation, and food, I think that would be really helpful to kick off this conversation. Do you want to?
Oh, I just wanted to, Andy had sent.
Yeah, I was just about to say, do you want to can Jenny or Kelly, Andy had sent communication about his thoughts around some of those other topics. And I think it might be helpful to kick off the conversation to hear his thoughts remotely.
Sure, I can read it. Yeah. Let's see. So this is Jenny Prosser speaking, but I am reading from Andy Hooper's email, which he asked us to bring into this meeting since he couldn't be here today. And on topic 7, incentives for public participation, he said, 1, where it exists, I think we should be clear about the evidence for different measures to increase civic participation. Some of the initial ideas, transportation, e.g., could be extremely expensive on both a time and planning and money/citizen basis. If there are examples where it's worked, adding numbers to set expectations on both outlay and increases in attendance would be useful.
This is the interpreter. If you don't mind, reading is very quick. If you could just slow down just a little bit, that'd be appreciated.
Sure.
Thank you. Great, thank you.
But should I start back at the beginning or should I keep going from where I left off?
When you mentioned something, transportation is expensive.
Okay, let's see. So number 1, where it exists, I think we should be clear about the evidence for different measures to increase civic participation. Some of the initial ideas, transportation, e.g., could be extremely expensive on both a time and planning and money/citizen basis. If there are examples where it's worked, adding numbers to set expectations on both outlay and increases in attendance would be useful to open meeting law groups considering these options. Where evidence does not exist, we should be clear that these measures are speculation. Number 2, engagement is much harder for some constituencies than others because of many factors: time, money, self-consciousness, unfamiliarity with process, all kinds of things. Some efforts at increasing engagement may increase engagement among the groups that are already engaged, rather than increasing the diversity of constituencies and voices which engage with the process. This is related to concerns I have raised previously about focusing on direct democracy for its own sake. We have many layers of representative governance and an expectation, reviewed by frequent elections, that those leaders consider and represent all their constituents when governing. There must be accessible avenues for citizen engagement, but our system neither requires nor always benefits from frictionless citizen engagement in every venue. So that was Andy Hooper's thoughts that he asked us to share for this part of the meeting.
Thank you. Frank.
So there's new people you might want to share out Andy's previous letter as well, which was well put and fits kind of into the incoherence of many government software, hardware, geeky tools that are not being used well or we're poor purchasing directions and stuff.
Okay.
That's basically, and he was saying all of across the page, you're seeing it. That's a very impactful letter.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Frank, but I don't want to do that at this moment because we're talking about other things that might encourage people to participate, which are childcare, translators, transportation, and food. So I just want to
Okay,
keep us focused on those
Right, we
things
were
right now.
wandering into him and some, some of the other people haven't seen it. With his permission, if you want to send that letter out to everybody, that might be all you need to do to see what is going on in the state that he's a witness to. That makes what we're trying to do more difficult as a case example.
Any thoughts on those other topics?
I can speak to childcare.
Yeah, childcare. Susan.
Yeah. Frank Ryan, the UVM professor who studied town meetings for 30 years and went to thousands of town meetings and had his students record how many men spoke, how many women spoke, how long did they speak, how long were the meetings. And one of the things he took note of, he had his students take note of, was childcare. And so we have 30 years of data, Andy Hooper, that says that childcare makes a difference. It moves the needle a little bit in terms of getting better participation, particularly among women, even though we all would hope that we would be past those gender roles. I've worked on a number of documents that offer examples of how towns do childcare. And one of the ways that we really shouldn't do childcare is asking voters, usually women voters, to do the childcare. It needs to be a reliable system that is outside of the pool of voters who are providing childcare. And ideally it's on site, and ideally it's free. And we've even experimented with childcare vouchers in that some folks, especially with little kids, would rather have their kids at home. You don't necessarily want to drop off. We're getting more comfortable with dropping off our 1-year-olds at childcare, but some people would rather do it at home. And so having vouchers available so that a person could have home care it's just another way to think about it. So yes, on childcare. There is another piece in terms of Frank Ryan's data. Should I just go ahead and say it? I mean, because there's not that much that you can, the biggest indicator in terms of, again, this is town meeting, although I think some of it does flow over into other meetings. The biggest indicator of, the most reliable indicator of high per capita participation in towns is town size. So the smaller the town, the higher the per capita participation. And there are some political science theories on why that happens, but I think it has a lot to do with connectivity, people understanding that their voice matters. And so the more that communities can make it clear through all the things we're talking about that everyone's voice matters, even as towns grow bigger, I think they can take advantage of that sort of human trait that we tend to get involved more when we're in, and it sort of runs contrary to all of the trends that we're doing right now with our school consolidation. It's kind of interesting that those systems are contrary to the way humans interconnect. But the other one in terms of town size is hot issues. By far the most likely way to get people to participate is to really clearly communicate why this issue is of interest to them. And sometimes you don't have to communicate that because the issue is putting a windmill on the hill right over there, and all of a sudden you've got 65% of the town showing up to the meeting because everybody gets it. But sometimes those issues are a little more obscure and they're tucked into the budget. But something like a change in the amount of road salt that you're using, or those kinds of things that affect us on a daily basis, or what are we going to be paying for a police presence for speeding, those kinds of things. The better we communicate that an issue is of interest to people, the better. Talk about incentives. That is what gets people to meetings. So I think that sometimes we think that it is going to be something technical, and oftentimes it has to do with communication. Data-based.
Kate.
Yeah, thank you. So also looking at the incentives and various resources, I also want to reiterate the fact that I know I've shared this many times in past meetings. Um, Universal design would have us have all of town meeting be conducted in plain language, and all associated documents would be accessible. So, for example, some towns decide to have websites. A lot of towns do not have websites. Some towns provide the option of receiving your town report, which is normally sent out in the mail, and it's 8-point font in black, in print only. Some, if you ask, will provide it in an accessible PDF form. Some will not. So the universal design of having everything in plain language, of having everything accessible, of having towns have websites where they provide their meeting minutes and their agendas, so you don't have to, for example, pay for a subscription to a newspaper because that's the only place that they actually warn town meetings, because they won't even do it on Front Porch Forum or Facebook, right? Like, you shouldn't have to have a subscription to a paper to know when various meetings are. So all of that would be super important. Also, I do not have 30 years of data, but I do have 4 years of lived experience of literally standing outside in the cold and from the outside looking in while people vote for town meeting that I don't have access to. And when I stand outside in the cold asking for access, what I notice is that another piece that's really, really critical is parking and safety. March is a time where there is a lot of snowstorms. We do not have parking spots, sufficient parking spots for ADA accessibility for people who want to go vote. There might be 2 available. Well, you have 10 voters who are needing to use those. What now? So that is another issue, is looking at the safety of being able to go to participate in town meeting and not having accessible parking. And then the last thing I want to add, this is part 2 of this. Are there topics missing from Act 133 that should be in the report? I want to quickly bring our attention to Article 8 of the Vermont State Constitution. So elections should be free and pure, rights of voters therein. So it's very short. I'll just read it. That all elections ought to be free and without corruption, and that all voters having a sufficient evident common interest with an attachment to the community have a right to elect officers and be elected into office. So the other part that is very exclusionary for a lot of the populations that we're mentioning is that if you are not there in the room, guess what? You don't get to be elected into office. And even for places where they're doing Australian ballot, this is problematic because we still have a system that requires petitions. If you are somebody who is a wheelchair user, for example, and you are required to get petition signatures, but you go down the street on, what is that street in Montpelier, Hill Street, and every single doorstep to a door is like 40 steps. The fact that we're requiring petitions in and of itself is inaccessible and keeps us from having our rights.
For towns who elect their officers from the floor, petitions aren't required, and you don't have to be in attendance to be nominated for an office. You have to be a registered voter, but you don't have to be in attendance at the meeting to be nominated and elected.
It's Wild West.
For select board members, are you not required, for like the town of Montpelier, for example, that doesn't have town meeting, but it still falls under Act 133? Is that it doesn't require petitions?
Do they elect their officers from the floor or
It's a
from?
city.
It's a city
Australian
election.
ballot.
It's Australian
It's
ballot.
Australian ballot. So Australian ballots do require petition, but if places are electing officers from the floor, they don't require a petition for any of those positions, and you can be nominated from the floor at the meeting without being present at the meeting and can then be elected. There's just so many variations on how
But
all of it
someone has to be there to name you, right? You can't
Yes,
put in your name.
yes, someone has to nominate you, but I've never actually witnessed someone nominating themselves for any election.
But I have witnessed people nominating people who aren't there.
Yes, I guess that's what I was getting at, is
Yeah,
that
you
it's
can nominate someone who's not in the room.
as long as they're,
Hopefully they know
as long
they're
as they're
getting
eligible to be
nominated.
elected.
Hopefully they know they're getting nominated.
Well, and that's the rationale behind the petition process is to, so there's a tension with petitions, because there are good reasons to have petitions, for the Australian ballot. But I hear your point, Kate.
It's the ink signatures.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, so I'm just my point is that is an artificial barrier that keeps people, particularly those who are marginalized and those with disabilities, from being elected into office. And it sounds like there are some pathways and carve-outs in certain places, but overall, overarching, this is a constructed barrier that I think should be changed.
Seconds.
Frank.
And this is exactly why I like Susan's presentation of what New Hampshire has as an option. Is that previous meeting, you can iron out what essentially what is going to be on the ballot, who wants to be and everything. And then you have a warning time adequate for having an Australian ballot being performed. And then you have the best of both worlds. And they give it to you as an option at towns. How many towns have taken it up, Susan?
In New Hampshire,
Yeah.
I think something like 45 towns, something like that. Yeah.
So they're offering a carrot to something they may have wanted been doing for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's their version of Australian ballot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on childcare? Or translators? Kate.
When you say translators, are you referring to people translating like the public meeting announcements and the written documents?
Yes, into other languages is, I believe, the intent of what we're asked to talk about.
Are you also talking about having interpreters during town meeting discussion in languages besides ASO?
Yes.
Okay, I just wasn't clear because it's like often you hear translator encompassing both terms.
Yeah, it's not clear in our statutory mission, but I think we can reasonably interpret that what they're talking about, discussing is translators that not just for hearing purposes, but also in other languages, and what should be required, or what's best practices and what should be required of communities, of translation of documents for people who do not speak English, and translation of meetings for people who do not speak English.
Okay, yeah, just for clarity, translation spoken, translator isn't the word, interpreter would be the word to use, and that might help talk about the two different things in a clear way. That was my only question. I don't have any context for the history of the discussion, so it's only semantics.
Yes. So this is Jenny Prosser, and just our statutory charge listed off. They just included the word translators, but I hear you. Yes, when we speak about this, we should be speaking about translators and interpreters in our report.
Yeah,
because I do think that was the intent.
And what do we have any clarity on? I mean, I'm fascinated by this idea of translators and interpreters, and I don't know what the report is likely to say. I don't like, we
haven't had the conversation. This is the first time we've talked about this issue outside of ASL. So I think that's what I'm asking us to talk about is interpreters and translators for people who are non-English speaking. Laura Siegel.
So this kind of conversation pop up on my radar all the time. I'm not just talking about ASL, I'm talking about other languages as well. And oftentimes I've had to tell people, are you tracking how often we get the request? And people tell me no. I try to advise people it's better to start tracking, because that way you can create a 5-year or 10-year plan of how much you need in the budget going forward, whatever language that they see a common pattern of what things need to be translated or interpreted. And yet there is a huge distinction. Translation basically means spoken language translated into a document. And interpreted all verbal or visual, you know. So, and I do notice, I mean, I'm hearing that there's specific times throughout the state where they do have a tendency to get ASL interpreters, but sometimes it gets like, I know one person tells me, the town tells me they can't afford interpreters for me anymore, so I don't know how I can participate if they don't have the funding to allow me to be able to participate. And I'm like, well, they probably really do not have the money. And so they try to offer alternative ways for them to be included, but it's not at the level that they need. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm
Laura,
just not sure
sorry.
how I can offer a solution. That's why it all boils down to money. Like if you have one person who wants to go to all the meetings, then we need to find some way, whether it's spoken or like there must be some sort of backup funding. You know, like you have a funding step for your town, and then it just so happen to get more than the usual request. Where can you get the backup funding from? If there's any.
Yes. Laura Cushman.
I guess I'm because I don't know. For town meetings, are ASL interpreters being used at the town? I mean, do we even have enough ASL interpreters in the state of Vermont to provide ASL interpretation in every town on town meeting day? I have no idea what's already being done, and if we're gonna recommend that every town have an ASL interpreter on town meeting day. How do we do that if those interpreters don't exist?
But let me ask you this. Are all the town meetings scheduled at the same time?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question. What are we doing already? Are people incorporating ASL interpreters?
This is Lauren Hibbert. The answer to your question, Laura Siegel, is no, all town meetings are not scheduled at the same time. And no, every town does not have town meetings. So we have data on the number of towns that have town meeting. I believe we have that broken down. Some towns have moved their town meeting off of Tuesday to Saturday, in part to be more accessible to people who work Monday through Friday, on an hourly wage, which, is a move towards accessibility. There's some towns that keep their town meeting on town meeting day, but there's ripple effects to that for people who do not have that day off, or, there's a lot of ways to look at accessibility, and income accessibility to town meeting is a factor. There's a lot of folks who cannot take a day off, who don't have paid days off. But we do have data on how many towns are having town meeting, and we do have data, right, Sean, on the days of the week that towns are meeting. So I can tell you there's a diversity of schedules.
So let me ask you this.
Okay.
Again, this is me being ignorant. I don't really know that much about town meetings in general. So if anyone wants to participate in town meeting, is it required that they have to physically be there in person?
For most.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
For voting, yes.
Okay. So even though the participants have to be there in person, there's always the option where you could do the hybrid format, where you just have to provide a laptop to have the interpreter visible on a computer screen for them to watch it. That's another option, because you need to take into consideration we only have 30-something certified ASL interpreters. 30. That's it.
Yeah.
That's not enough to cover every time. And then the other thing you need to think about is that everyone really goes to all those town meetings. And then on top of that, you have to think about people who rely on tactile sign language, who are deaf and blind. and they need interpreters in person, and not just one, two.
Yeah.
So that's why I was asking, is there a way that you can like, I know it sounds kind of odd, but you can make an exception where you're gonna have a town meeting and want to think about all the interpreters that's out there. Can you clump it all together to accommodate just for the people who rely on ASL? And maybe you have some feasibility, but is that even possible? I've never been to a town meeting before. I have no idea.
Laura Siegel, I highly recommend that you go to town meeting with Susan Clark sometime.
Yes.
I think it would be a good thing for you to do. I think town meeting is an interesting thing to do, and it would be fun for both of you.
Absolutely, let's do it.
And I've gone with Susan multiple times. Oh, sorry, this is Sean. I live in the city of Montpelier, so I'm deprived of town meeting, but I have gone to Middlesex's, so I can see Susan.
I believe, Tim, you had your hand up first. I don't see you on the screen, but I think you're first.
Thank you. Just to clarify for the committee, again, I come from Vernon. We have had an ASL interpreter at town meeting for every year since the start of COVID, and it's been tough getting them. I've needed to make the arrangements as soon as we set our warning, and even during the COVID years, we held our town meeting outside under a circus tent. And as both clerk and moderator, I did feel like I was running the big top. So it is a cost of doing business. We, as a state, need to do it with all our towns. And gosh, I don't know why more are not doing it if not for the lack of awareness. Thank you.
Thank you. Kate Perlberg Kavan.
Thank you. I was going to add before, it's a little bit off topic now, but responding to Laura Siegel's point about tracking how many requests towns get for language interpretation, non-ASL language interpretation. Just wanted to call back the point that was made before about folks, shouldn't need to ask for it. And that I think maybe one thing that towns could do would be that there is a recommendation or even a requirement that if there is a certain demographic percentage of speakers of a particular language, that interpretation is provided automatically, which would then maybe increase people's likeliness to go who wouldn't maybe request interpretation because they had never been to town meeting, right? So that might be a sort of proactive measure.
Thank you. That's a good point. AJ.
Yeah, thank you. As someone who scheduled a lot of TERPs, which was sort of a slang for interpreters, and CART and other real-time captionists, remember that automatic captioning is not a legitimate accommodation for people with hearing impairments. As someone who did a lot of it in the Philadelphia area, where you would think there were tons of interpreters and tons of captionists, but there are also lots of higher ed institutions. And I did it for an institution of higher ed through over 3 campuses. We came to rely on, and this was sort of as a consequence of COVID, remote captioning and remote interpreters. And students got really facile with the technology. They had the technology so that it allowed them to look at the screens, look at their screens for the CART captioning. We know what remote interpreting looks like, and you can do that and have that projected at town meeting as well. That tremendously expands the range of saying how many interpreters are there in Vermont, which are clearly not enough. This brings to mind the point that as well as a guide of best practices, I think we need to give towns a resource guide for identifying sources of these remote interpreters, remote captionists, where if you get a request for Braille, do you go? People don't know that. I know how to find out, but it would, if I was a town clerk, I would find it a lot easier to have a guide with resources and names of people to contact. We don't want them probably calling Laura Siegel every time they have a question. This is information that's out there. And I think towns would feel a lot more empowered and confident. And I think it would also help people to realize there are workable solutions. And by the way, the cost of remote interpreting and captioning, real-time captioning, is less, often significantly, than having someone on site, because you're not paying for transportation, something I came to appreciate when I was accommodating a lot of students. So by having a resource guide for these and other accommodations that are likely to come up that we promulgate to town offices, I think that that would reduce anxiety and empower people a lot. I don't think it's that hard to deliver these basic reasonable accommodations, which brings me to the final point is, and I guess this goes with best practices, how many towns, when they warn for town meeting, have an invitation to identify whether or not you require any reasonable accommodations to fully participate. So that should be something which towns do as well.
Kate LaRose.
Thank you. So I just want to highlight the fact that these are 3 separate charges on our agenda today. So investigating resources is charge 7, and other topics that are missing is charge 8. And the reason that I'm saying this is I want to make sure that we are expanding our conversation, because I think we are thinking those are sub-bullets of hybrid town meetings. They are not. Charges 7 and 8 are specific to accessibility of and participation in all meetings of local public bodies, annual meetings, and local elections. So that includes the town meeting day Australian ballot vote in Montpelier. That includes my select board meeting on Wednesdays, right? Like, it is inclusive. So I was worried that we were starting to focus just on those items under hybrid town meeting, when in fact it's actually very expansive.
I agree. Definitely. Yep. Good point. AJ and Kate LaRose, can you take down your hands, just because I get very confused if there's everybody's hands is up. Laura Cushman.
I just been meaning to say, Kate had mentioned something about parking and actual physical accessibility to the spaces for folks. And I did want to let the group know that, Disability Rights Vermont does polling place surveys. Now, polling places and public meeting spaces are not necessarily the same places, but we have, over the last number of years, we are almost done surveying every polling place in the state of Vermont. And it is an accessibility survey. These are the required number of, parking spaces, ramps, doorways, etc. And we survey the spaces for physical accessibility. And so I have asked my coworker, Tina, who has been doing these polling place surveys for years, to put together a sort of report about, about what we have seen in our surveys, so that I can provide that to you guys so you can see what we're looking at. Now, we do these surveys. We've only had one polling place refuse to have us survey their space. Everywhere else, they've been willing to let us survey their space, and then we just come back with, this is the ideal, and these are the places where you could make improvements. At some polling places are really open to receiving those suggestions, and some not. Some have made those improvements and some not. So, anyway, I just wanted to be able to provide that information to the group so that you can see what we're dealing with in terms of physical accessibility and what we've seen over the years in doing these polls. So she will hopefully have that for me by our next meeting. And I will try to get that to you as soon as I can.
Okay, I was just about to ask, that's publicly available information.
I don't know that it's not something that we published on our website or anything. It's not something that's, DRVT does the polls and we make the recommendations, but I don't know that it's published anywhere for people to see.
Okay, let's talk that through, Laura, because if you give it to us, it becomes public. So let's just talk that through.
Yep.
Laura Siegel.
So the other thing that I want you to be mindful about is, like, for example, if I didn't have multiple monitors behind my laptop, this meeting is automatically inaccessible to me because the center stars are taking up the entire screen and it makes my interpretive video this dinky. But luckily, I have 2 monitors. Does everybody in the state of Vermont have multiple monitors? No. That's one thing. Again, sometimes it's just the nitty gritty detail that people don't seem to realize that, oh, that's causing inaccessibility right there. Where sometimes there have been times where people would brag about, oh, the town of Bada does an amazing job doing a tip with the ASL interpreter. And I'm like, really? And then I contact with them, and then I'd be like, oh, can you help me with these other towns, educate them how you do the PIP? Because I'm not a tech expert. I don't know how to hook it up and all that. But I do understand, like, I have the basic understanding of what it's all about, you know? And so it's better to connect their tech people with other town tech people, and then hopefully they can figure it out themselves. So sometimes you might just need someone on staff that has some sort of technical expertise if you're going to host a hybrid meeting.
Yeah, I think there's pieces that I'm continue to hear, which is resources and training. And I think that's really, really important. And also, Laura, I appreciate you mentioning that there's nitty gritty that people may not think about, because we just did that. We were sharing the agenda. That was because it's really helpful for me. It's a tool for me to be able to keep on task and to keep us all on task, because then everyone can see the agenda and see where we are. But it was making it harder for you to see your interpreter. So I would not know that inherently. So I'm sorry about that, but I need, that's why the nitty gritty is really hard to figure out sometimes.
Yeah, I know. And sometimes, like, I'm brave enough to interrupt people. So I'm brave enough to say, hey, can you stop sharing the screen because I want to be able to see my interpreter. And also, I understand that you want to see the agenda, but hey, you're here in the conference room. You can easily print it and have it right in front of you instead of right on the monitor, you know. But also, I've seen people, what they tend to do is they always copy the agenda. I mean, there's always like a moderator, someone who's a timekeeper or whatever, and then they can just plug it into the chat room. That's what I've seen people do. But I mean, again, you would have to hit someone, hey, do we have a note taker in the meeting room? Do we have someone monitoring the chat? Do we have someone who's a timekeeper? You need to have a point, two people to do one of those. You can't expect one person to do it all.
Yeah, and I think we just have to acknowledge that we have many places in the state where there is one person doing it all, and that is a tension. So it's just a reality. But yes, I agree with you. Frank, and then Kate.
I have a question for Susan. Since you're familiar with the New Hampshire environment, and we're talking about the hybrid, can the first meeting of the 2 phases, you have the Australian ballot, and the first meeting is basically a town meeting, that could be easily be made hybrid, because it's basically a glorified select board meeting where the public aren't voting on anything, but they may influence the direction of the select board, where a ballot is set up, an item for the Australian thing, So you would be able to have all the inclusive tools that you would imagine if you can do that in that first meeting.
So interesting. I mean, probably I'm guessing most people aren't following the nuance that we're talking about here,
Yeah.
but just really briefly, what you're describing, where the first meeting is a select board meeting and the second meeting the second portion is a ballot meeting. That's what they do in Jericho.
But we throw on the New Hampshire aspect of Jericho there.
In New Hampshire, that first meeting is an empowered town meeting. So at that first meeting in New Hampshire, people can amend. And so you must be a registered voter to, speak and make amendments at that first meeting. And so no state that I know of has figured out how to thread the needle and have a person be remote and voting at that empowered meeting.
So what if it's a super select board meeting, not an empowered meeting? That would be basically what happens during Australian ballot today. Is this no, in Pollitt it does. The select board has budget meetings and they have process meetings where their people show up and they're going to submit their petition to be on this ballot or that ballot, and it all gets finalized and signed off on, and it goes to town clerk to do all the setting it all up.
So that is what Jericho is experimenting with. And so basically the voters of Jericho have said, we trust you, select board. We are the legislative branch and we do have the power to amend, but we're giving all of that power over to the select board with the pinky promise that you will listen to us. And so they have that in-person meeting and they made amendments. They voted, but it was officially a select board meeting. And at the end of that meeting, the select board then voted to adopt everything that had happened at that meeting. And so it's very much of their model relies entirely on trust. So if there are norms within the community that can make that happen, that's great until the norms are broken. But that's just one model. But I feel like it's kind of a wonky.
And there's then the Brattleboro model with the representative town meeting, which is different.
Yep.
Because they elect people to be at the town meeting on behalf of that subgroup of voters, right? They essentially have wards within Brattleboro, and then they elect someone to represent that ward at a town meeting that everyone can watch, but the people who are the representatives can participate in. Is that
exactly?
accurate?
That's exactly right, and that's really common in Massachusetts. It's common throughout New England. Vermont only has one town that does it, so we think it's weird. It's not weird at all. It's really common. A representative town meeting is a very common model in New England and also in Switzerland. Zurich is with 350,000 people is a representative town meeting because we're electing by wards, and so rather than like a 9-member council, they have like 150 people there.
Yeah. Follow up is, can this Jericho meeting, can the populace actually make nominations for elections for office that would be then that still has to go through the petition process before that Jericho meeting, which is basically a glorified select board meeting?
It just so happens that Jericho already elects officers by ballot. I mean, as you know, there are 3 things that you can do by ballot. One of them is elect officers. The other one is do the budget. And the third one is public questions. Just so happens Jericho was already electing their officers by ballot. So it wasn't part of their new system. That didn't change.
The deadline to be on by ballot would be follow that meeting typically, right?
Frank, I'm gonna just pause us for a second.
Last technical detail. Next question.
Yeah, their town meeting, their Australian ballot vote is on town meeting day. So all of those things like that meeting happens in January. So the petition timing for electing officers is the same as it always was.
Except for that informative super select board meeting.
Yeah.
Kate.
Thank you. So going back to, are there other topics missing from Act 133 that should be in the report, I have 5 additional ones that I wanted to add. The first is really making sure, and I don't think we've ever done this in these meetings, and this is something across the board that is super needed. Like, I think a really clear overview of the current state of voting and elections around the state and what that looks like. And that would include actual data, right? So the number of towns doing floor votes and for which of the 3 options. Also, I think it's really important to talk about how some towns, as you just mentioned, have both floor votes and Australian ballots, because point 3 is we really need voter education included, especially in those towns that have the mixed methods. Because what happens time and time again is voters will request an absentee ballot, they will be sent an absentee ballot, and they'll be like, wait, why am I only voting for this one thing? Or they think that they've received their absentee ballot and now they are voting on everything that exists, but they are not. They may only be voting on 1 or 2 things when there's a whole lot more. So I think there's a lot of voters out there that are missing out on the fullness of the options they should be voting for. The other thing is, at the last meeting, the director of elections was here, super helpful. I think he shared that there were something like 40 to 60 laws and statutes that are applicable to this conversation, which just floored me. So, oh my gosh, I want a table with references of what are those 40 to 60 laws pertaining to this issue. That is so, so important. And then the very last thing, I think I've mentioned this at one of the early meetings, is I talk a lot about state and federal laws for voter access. We also have the current provision here in Vermont for curbside voting. A lot of towns have no idea that that exists. And I think the example I gave in the past, and these are not like small towns, right? We're not picking on small towns, is across the board. The city of Waterbury in this election cycle denied a voter their very clear written request for curbside voting because they did not know that was a law, or the person responding did not know that. So those are 5 additional items I'd like included as well.
Kate, I missed what was 2.
So a clear overview of current state of voting around the state, report data, the number of towns doing floor votes and for which of the 3 options. And then also including the piece about the number of towns that have both floor votes and Australian ballots. Like, I can pull it from the spreadsheet.
Okay.
I think that information
Well,
exists.
it kind of
this-
is. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, this is Sean. Not all completely there, but I did just post a link on the site. We do conduct a town meeting survey each year, and the link I just put in at least lists all the towns and which methods whether they use Australian vote or.
Yes. So I have seen that. I have used it. What's missing, though, is the actual narrative piece to make sense of it. That, like, because I can go town by town, yes, but like from a big picture for the legislators to understand, 20% of towns are doing mixed method, right? Like, there's no way, like, without going through, it's not even in Excel. In the past it has been, the one on the Secretary of State's website. So it's like, oh no, a PDF, how do I deal with that? So yeah, I think like actually making the full big picture meaning so that legislators and people reading the report get the full context of it. But yes, thank you for providing that as well. That's very helpful.
Yeah, that's clear. And certainly we can work that in the report.
Jenny, this is Jenny. I'll just note that part of our charge, that we have a separate item in our charge that is to analyze voter turnout and the voting methods currently used throughout the state. And so that's going to be its own standalone item in our report for sure.
Yeah, like I would wonder what voting turnout looks like on, like, how would you analyze a mixed method town on voting turnout, right? Like, because people are getting their Australian ballots thinking that they're voting, but then, you know, they probably have less folks at the floor votes because nobody knows that there are floor votes.
Yeah, Susan, you wanted to add to that?
Well, I was just to add that in towns, when we're voting on our budgets, there's some confusion as well about what part goes to the town and what part goes to the school because of property taxes. And so, you know, in fact, by far the lion's share of what we're voting on is about schools, not town. And that's things that towns don't control at all. And so when voters receive or don't receive ballots, it's important. It's important to understand that we're to break those out, and that is a vastly changing landscape. So that's just a key point. And there's one other point that I would add in the mix as we think about, again, I keep on wanting to zoom out and say, well, what kind of world do we want to live in? What kind of democracy do we want to live in? A really fascinating data point that is counterintuitive. It's not going to make sense to folks, but human beings don't make sense. Is that we know that our ballot system across the United States is skewed toward white people, toward rich people, toward people with degrees in higher education, basically the huge amount of socioeconomic skewing that for a variety of reasons. And that's a 2-hour great shame in terms of inclusion. Fascinatingly, that trend, which the political scientists assume would carry through to town meeting, did not carry through to town meeting. And in fact, there is no correlation between socioeconomic data in a town. And at least during those 30 years of the study, which went up to about 2013, but there was no correlation between any of the town's socioeconomic data. What do people do for a living? How much do they earn? How much education do they have? And either the turnout for town meeting or the number of people who spoke, what we call participation in town meeting, which is, again, it's not what you would expect. And so I think it speaks to the complexity of human nature and the complexity of ways that we feel about our communities and ways that we feel about our democracy. So when we talk about inclusion, and in particular, when we talk about inclusion around class, it's something to keep in mind.
I'm going to go to Laura, who had her hand up.
I was just wanting some clarification from Kate about, you said you wanted a reference guide to all the relevant law. And I guess I was wondering, do you mean for public meeting law or what?
Oh, for hybrid voting. So I believe it was the director of elections. I had asked a question about the laws. And he said, wait, we're not talking about 1 or 2 laws. We're talking about like 40 to 60 laws here when we're talking about, is it legal to vote via hybrid meeting? But
that was Mark Hool. He's not the election director. Sean Sheehan is.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It was, yeah. But yes, there's all of this is intertwined in a lot of different places in the law related to hybrid.
That because we have not been provided that yet, correct? As a committee,
I don't believe so, but that's not something that we'd have readily available. That's something that would have to be created. That's not impossible, but that is a good amount of work. That's a huge
Thank you.
statute.
That's what I just wanted some clarification on exactly what laws you were talking about, because all of the voting laws, all of the accessibility laws, no, only with regards to hybrid voting. Got it.
So when a
Thank
town,
you.
like we were told last meeting, is told that they cannot offer hybrid voting, what is the rationale provided by the state for why they cannot offer that?
Security for one.
Well,
verification for another.
Frank, there's a lot of laws that could be changed, right? But that there's a structure that has always assumed historically, because when the laws were written, there was no concept of hybrid.
That's right.
So the law was written, I can tell you, in probably 1970, and there was no concept of a hybrid. So does there need to be adjustments? Possibly, maybe. But this is an area that we do have to grapple with. Why not make an amendment? Laura, that's exactly right. We have to figure out how to make the laws more current. That's, I think, part of the point of this working group is how do we want to make hybrid town meeting? What does that look like? And how does that how does that work?
Doesn't, unless you can fix the electric.
And that's
That's
the
a zero
rub. Yep.
factor.
And also, how do you have the richness of the conversation? But can you have a richness of the conversation if people are not included? So that's what we're grappling with.
If we don't have to do everything the town meeting has, if you have the super town select board meeting where you can do that, just like we're doing select board meetings all over the place where the public can come in and through the public participation can jump in on that and then do the Australian ballot down the road. And then we're essentially play a variety of platform where everybody can jump in, and it's a hybrid. So we have a big old town meeting and few people come in on the screens or handheld devices.
I mean, I 100% hear what you're saying, and I think that the state has to be careful about what they mandate local communities do, because local communities have control over how they conduct their business. And similar to like how we don't want the federal government to tell us at the state level how to do everything, we have to be careful about state government mandating a ton of things to local folks. And there's some things that are non-negotiable, like accessibility, but that gets pretty murky pretty fast. So I just want to say that it's not a simple fix. None of these are simple fixes, because they would be fixed, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking about them, advocating for them, embracing them, talking about them. It's not. Some towns, if you said you should have this engaged, robust informational meeting and then an Australian ballot, there are a lot of towns in Vermont that would say we were taking away town meeting.
Right, but New Hampshire's made it optional, which is the key thing there.
It depends if there's power at the meeting. Yeah, it depends on if there's power at the meeting. And I think we just have to be aware of that.
Yeah, so,
yeah, Laura, thank you for saying that. That's important. I would love that, to live in utopia if it was easier.
Yes, I know.
Doesn't mean we shouldn't be striving to be better, though.
Yeah, maybe we can get the Canadians to come to Vermont's utopia.
Okay, yeah, Kelly.
This is Kelly Pyala. I after the last meeting was thinking about the Jericho model, and really any select board could opt to have a meeting where they made it known that they wanted feedback, that they, like, this is what we are thinking. We would like to hear from the public. We would like you to offer changes. That is available for any select board to do at any of their meetings on any subject at any time. And that's really a question of teaching leaders how to encourage more engagement, and teaching citizens how to be engaged and learn how their government runs. And I just, it's like those are all things that can actively happen in any community, which should be encouraged. And that's not everything needs a change in law for some of these things to be moved forward. Some of it is education, some of it is changes in attitude, some of it is 100% accessibility. But I getting bogged down in making changes where changes aren't, where the law isn't the impediment, it's just, it was like, there's nothing stopping anyone from doing exactly what Jericho is doing, as long as the town is engaged and the board is engaged, and there is that trust. And that's
That's the thing you can't legislate no matter how hard you try.
But that is something that we can really educate on and highlight and encourage and create guidance on how to do it. You
Absolutely.
know, we can move the needle.
Yes, but it just, you know, that identifying what the change is and where to put the energy, which is a challenge, was just something I was mulling over, because I wouldn't want a select board to say, well, you have to change the law for us to do that. Nope, don't. Don't have to.
Right.
You can choose to do that as the leaders of your community, as is.
I think that you're right, but the New Hampshire model, I don't know if New Hampshire model allows amendments during that period of time from the floor to nominate people for office, for example, from that would need petitions. That would be a great thing to have it from the floor. And a lot more people would show up for that.
Well, the election of officers there's a different set of laws that is governing election of officers.
Yeah.
So that's where the number of laws that you would have to look at gets exponentially higher.
But any select board meeting could be super announced and, hey, we're going to cover all this stuff and we're going to have pizza for everybody and make it a big party. The kids from the school are going to come and sing and everything like this. You know, and make it into a big deal, and then everybody shows up and things get gone over. It's like where it gets a good idea what you're going to be putting up on the final ballot. Good idea. And you could probably run your AI speech transcribers to any language, which I've seen on the Samsung Ultra S24 and 25 Ultras now. They cost all outdoors, but I saw the video. I put it in several email attachments where it's just like unbelievable, technology that's out there. It doesn't have the personal touch, but it, you can put it on tablets and take it, I'm done with that.
Thinking back to the topics we were talking about, food, and to Kate's most recent point, we don't want pizza, just access, but there are people who do want pizza too. So I don't know if there's been evidence around having food at town meeting, if that encourages people to come and encourages people to stay.
I don't know of any data on that. This is Susan Clark, and but what I do think that and we've talked about sort of gradations in this report, and I do think that there are some things that are things that municipal government need to be aware of and need to do. I think there are also things that are, I'm a big advocate of having a democracy committee in a town, just the way we have a conservation commission in a town, or, groups that are interested in things, volunteer committees that can help beleaguered town officials. And I think that offering food at meetings it comes under the wouldn't it be cool element. Like it's not like, oh, the state legislature should mandate that every town has pizza at its town meeting. I think that would not be a good idea. I do think that it's a delightful idea to say, here are some ways that communities are improving participation. And I also think, just to follow up on Kelly's point, I think it would be really helpful in this report to delineate what can we do now? Like, what can a town do right now, no legislative change needed, to improve accessibility? And I think that there is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that we can do under current law. I would even argue that what Cambridge did is a lot under current law. But that's me. I'm not a lawyer. So we're hoping for guidance on that. But delineate what can we do now, and a really separate question is, what do we need to ask the legislature to.
I have a clarifying question about, we talk a lot about like, this is against the law and this is against the law. Like when it comes to open meeting law, is the body of enforcement just the Secretary of State's office? Like, is that it?
Jenny.
This is Jenny. The Secretary of State's office is not the body of enforcement for the open meeting law. At the state level, it's the Attorney General's office has the power to investigate and enforce potential violations of the law.
Complaints.
Has that ever
A
happened?
parallel path with members of the public. So any aggrieved individual, right, may file a written complaint with the board. If unhappy with the board's public dealing with that complaint can go to court. So can the Attorney General's office. So it's not a step it up, but they're parallel paths. How often the Attorney General gets involved, I can't say. I know that occasionally they do look at things. Occasionally they do issue advisory opinions, for example. I haven't seen too much in the way of court action by the Attorney General's office, but they are the state office that has that enforcement authority.
I
The
don't
role
mean
of
to
the
be glib, but it feels like we're like, this whole thing is based on fear of like this scary open public meeting law stuff that like really when you look at the other laws on the books, like psh, like why are municipalities living in fear of open meeting law enforcement and not civil rights enforcement? I guess like that's the part that I'm just having a hard time with, that we offer up often in this committee that these these open meeting laws are heralded as gold standard and just as important and prioritized as these other laws that are like access issues.
I don't see the laws in competition with each other. Kate, I actually think open meeting law always should be used. And I think what we're trying to figure out is how is it not right now working for accessibility? I don't know that I agree with you that we are saying that accessibility law shouldn't be followed. I think we're saying how should open meeting law be, and how should we ensure that open meeting law is accommodating accessibility and as it should. And so we're talking about, I mean, it's open meeting law really, I'm struggling to think of any way that it would inhibit accessibility outside of the voting. In-person voting is the area, but that's not open meeting law. Open meeting law is having agendas posted, minutes, knowing where to go for the meeting, whether it's in person or remote. That's open meeting law, but so I guess I'd like you to explain that more because I don't understand.
Yeah, no, here's an example from the last meeting, right? I said, hey, universal design, actually, let's make that reasonable accommodation request for all materials 1 week in advance, right? And I said, yeah, I know open meeting law says 48 hours. And Jenny said, actually, I think it's 24 in this case. And so then it became an issue. Like, this is what happened. The reason I bring this up is because this is how it works on the town level. Town clerks revere open meeting law above all, because that's what they're trained in. And they will use open meeting law as a lever to shut off people's reasonable accommodations under federal and state law.
By limiting the time, is that what you're saying?
By what?
And Jenny.
Is it by limiting, is your complaint that they limit the time or they don't let you speak at all?
Oh, I think we were talking about something different.
Yeah, Jenny.
So this is Jenny. 2 points I just want to clarify with regards to the 24-hour versus 48-hour. It's my belief that it is not clear in law whether or not the open meeting law requires 24 or 48 hours for the meetings that this group has scheduled. So I would not say affirmatively that it's 24 hours. But I think the point to which Kate might be speaking, and this is what I hear from folks that call the open meeting law is meant to make sure that boards do their business in public, right, in front of people, but it's also meant to ensure that the public has the right to participate in those decisions, to attend and participate. And those are the 2 places where I think municipal officials tend to get more direct training on what that looks like in the open meeting law context, rather than what that looks like in all the other areas of laws that are protecting the rights of people to attend and participate in meetings. And I think that's true. I think that we have more of a focus on that. It's a smaller body of law. It's easier to learn and understand. And I think there are some really, the trainers are focusing on those laws at the local level. It's state law, not federal law. So you have the state feeling more comfortable kind of trying to figure out how to educate about that. So that is something that, though I do hear from folks that the open meeting law is, I'm trying to come. No, just give me a minute. It is this known entity, right? This known entity where we fear the consequences of violations, where I'm not sure people could even articulate what the consequences are in federal law for violating, or even state or federal disability law. And I think that's on, the educators, us as educators too, to try to get that information out there.
And I think partners. And I mean, we're not alone.
Yeah.
I think Disability Rights Vermont could be training town clerks.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be really helpful. I know Laura has offered to train town clerks. That would be really helpful. The Human Rights Commission could absolutely train town clerks. But I think there's a lot of opportunities that we just haven't gotten to yet.
I think Tim Arsenault has a point.
Yep. Tim, did you have a point? I see your comment, and then we'll go to the hands up on the screen.
I just find that we do need to realize that some of us are doing what we can, and I know we all need to do more, but please don't make us feel like we're enemies. I feel some of the comments today have been in that direction.
Yeah. AJ.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to raise the issue because a lot of times we're talking about globally sort of altering the way we operate as a state and towns operate as a state. But I also want to raise the issue of reasonable accommodations. Reasonable accommodations require entities to change practices and policies for people with disabilities, for a protected class, because in fact, many of those practices, procedures were not created thinking about people with disabilities. It was sort of everybody is able to hear, everybody hears and hears well, everybody sees, everybody's is able-bodied. The whole purpose of a reasonable accommodation is, I mean, it would be lovely if we had universal design, but there would still be a need for reasonable accommodations at time, because disability is often expresses itself, even two people have the same diagnosis, may express itself differently. But on the whole, we can agree that universal design for inclusion would reduce the number of individual accommodations. Right now, we don't have that. And we should have reasonable accommodations for people who need them, and for towns to meet the requirements of federal statute. I get it about open meeting laws. I get it that that's what town clerks and officers are trained in. I think we need more education, but I've always been led to understand that federal statutes, including civil rights laws, supersedes smaller entity statute laws, etc. So if a person with a disability requires an accommodation that is outside, at this point, public meeting law allows, it's a smaller lift to provide accommodations right now until we have a better fix, including electronic voting, and I'll be sending something out to the tech group. There are platforms that exist and allow for security and identification of voters and are accessible. Yes, it will require training, but to do that for a few people who need it rather than open it up to everyone is a smaller lift, and I think speaks to both the letter and the spirit of the law.
Lauren,
I just wanted to say the legal question has come up, legal questions have come up the last couple meetings about, this concern about whether or not, changes that are being made are legal or whatever. And I would like to be able to help us suss out some of this stuff, but I think I need specific questions. If there is a specific legal question that we're asking about something that you would like me to research or write a memo on or respond about, I've heard a couple times we're hoping for some legal expertise. And so I just want to say, like, having a big general question about figure out whether any of these changes it's much too big an ask. I don't have that much spare time. But if there is a specific question that that we want to look at the legality of something, then if maybe I know what the specific ask is. Did the town of Cambridge, when they did violate the open meeting law, if it were concise like that, then I might be able to focus my time and energy on answering that question. So there's that. And then I guess the other thing I wanted to sort of ask and inquire about is when a town is asked to provide an accommodation or make some sort of change, and then they refuse to do so because they're concerned about the question of legality. Maybe they don't know the answer to whether or not that change would be legal or not. Is there a hotline? Is there somebody that they can call? Do they have a lawyer on retainer to answer those questions for them? Or can they call the Secretary of State's office and get an answer about a question like that before simply saying, no, we can't do it, we don't know if it's violative of the law? Like, would it be helpful for there to be a legal question and answers for towns when hotline, when something like this comes up?
Most towns have a lawyer that they can ask questions to. We are asked to answer legal questions all the time, and we do not provide legal advice in that way because we are not a town's lawyer. We just are not. We are a resource. We are available, but we can't provide fact-specific legal answers of this is legal or that is illegal.
Advice.
That's all we can do. And I don't think we ever know enough to get into the place where we're offering legal advice. What we do help towns with is some, like, let's say there's a reasonable accommodation. What are some factors to help determine what you can do under a reasonable accommodation? What's reasonable for you to do? And parameters and resources to go talk to. And a lot of times it is your town attorney. We refer people to you, Laura. So I hope that towns are calling. But Jenny.
I'll just add to that. So one of the reasons we don't offer legal advice, aside from the resource issue and the need to really do diligent research before we would do that, is that we talk to everybody. We talk to towns, we talk to members of the public. And if we're going to be talking to everybody on all sides of an issue, we cannot be giving legal advice to any one of those folks, because otherwise we're establishing conflicts of interests for ourselves.
Yeah.
So towns do have one other resource, though, which is the League of Cities and Towns, which is the group that is provides education and all kinds of other resources to municipalities. They've appointed some folks to this group here, and they do have a municipal assistance center team of, gosh, they're probably up to 7 or 8 staff, at least half of whom are lawyers, that do give limited legal advice to member towns. And it's not just towns, cities, some other types of municipalities, not schools, districts, but a lot of municipalities are able to rely on them for these kinds of questions. Is what I am doing ADA compliant? They could call the League of Cities and Towns and get an answer on that. I do think when things are very complicated, they often still refer towns back to their own attorneys, but they at least do sort of this, I would say, a warm line work, that you're describing.
Final question
Frank, and then we're going to close the meeting.
is the monkey that's missing in the room, or the elephant, is the Attorney General's office, because they are a component of this, the enforcement component. And we don't know what they're thinking about these type of cases coming towards them.
In my experience, they will not provide answers on hypotheticals.
But as part of the report, they should probably offer up a section of the report themselves with their position on open meeting law and what they're not even going to do that to the legislature. They wouldn't tell them.
No, they don't want to. They don't want to make predeterminations on fact patterns. That they don't have investigations for, Frank. I mean, I as a lawyer,
I heard a rumor that they don't even want to bother with it because they got bigger fish to fry. Well, that's what I heard.
I can tell you that the Attorney General's office has a wide range of responsibilities. I don't know what resources they're putting where, but they are not going to give a legal opinion on a hypothetical. And it's just
Kate. Maybe you could have an encounter with the Attorney General's office relative to some of the serious open meeting issues that you brought forward, and come back to the group and report what your experience has been relative to their desire to enforce the law.
The beautiful thing about the laws is that everyone in every town can do the same thing, and you don't, in fact, have to be someone from a protected class to enforce the law. So I would welcome and invite all of us to be doing that.
Feels pretty confrontational to me.
okay. I am going to close this meeting and say thank you, everyone, for the participation. We have another meeting scheduled. When is that?
I have the next one here. Let me find it.
It's today is the 14th. 28th. Funding, wrap up any topic.
Okay, so we'll have an agenda for that meeting. If anyone has any items to add to the agenda, please send them to Jenny. And we are providing that agenda a week beforehand. So please send those agenda items to Jenny by Monday or Tuesday of next week, please.
And then September 12th will be wrap up any topic.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Recording is stopped.